Hey y'all, today we're going to start a really important topic, and it is about triangles that are congruent. So in order for two triangles to be congruent, that means they're the exact same size and they're exact same shape. Of course, they're triangles, so they're the same shape, but they're also the same size. That means that uh, each angle in one triangle is congruent to a corresponding angle in the other triangle, and each side in one triangle is congruent to a corresponding side in another triangle. It doesn't matter how the triangles are positioned or oriented. So you can see I have two triangles here, and I'm going to tell you that they're congruent even though they're not positioned the same way. One's sort of upside down compared to the other one. And so what I have written here is called a triangle congruence statement. It's telling us that triangle KLM, and we use this as a triangle symbol, is congruent to triangle RQS. And we're really intentional about the way that we name these triangles. So the order of the letters in the name of each triangle is really important. We name each triangle using all three letters of all three angles, and the order when we're saying they're congruent is really important. I need to stress that. So the important part is that the letter that comes first, which represents angle K, is going to be congruent and correspond to the letter that comes first in the next triangle, which is angle R. And so we can denote that on the picture by putting a arc in K and an arc in R. And so that means that angle L, the middle letter, and angle Q, those two angles are congruent. And I'll show that by putting two arcs, because I want to know that L and Q are congruent to each other, but they're not congruent to R and K. Then I can say that M and S are congruent, and I'll use three arcs. And so those are my three pairs of corresponding congruent angles. And I can write the congruent statements for those. The statements that say angle K is congruent to angle R, angle L is congruent to angle Q, and angle M is congruent to angle S. These are called congruence statements. This is a triangle congruent statement. These are angle congruent statements. And then we can write the sides that are congruent. And it's easy to see the sides that are congruent just by looking at the combination of letters. So the first two letters, KL, that's a congruent side to the first two letters, RQ. And then the middle and the last letter, LM, is congruent to QS. And I'll actually put two slashes. And then KM and RS. And I'll put three slashes. You should also notice that, for instance, the one with three slashes, the side with three slashes is between the angle with one arc and the angle with three. And over here, the side with three slashes between the angle with one arc and three. And there are my side congruent statements. So there's six. Three for the angles, three for the sides, and then we can say seven if you want to talk about the two triangles that are congruent. So let's write the congruent statements for these pairs of triangles. If you notice, these triangles touch each other, so we have to be specific about how we name their angles. So I'm going to mark up the picture first for the angles, and I'm going to say that that angle and that angle are congruent. Those two and those two. And so I can say that angle L and angle B are congruent. They correspond. They're both the third letter in the triangle. But the other two are tricky because C is in both triangles and so is D. So I have to use three letters to name those angles. So I'll call this angle down here LCD. And you can see I can just go last letter, first letter, middle letter. So that means I go last letter, first letter, middle letter, B, C, D. And then LDC, it's kind of like going backwards. LDC is right here. So that one's congruent to BDC. If I look at my sides, I have LD and BD. I have CB and LC. And then CD and CD congruent to each other. And that brings up an important property. So whenever we want to say something is congruent to itself, like side CD is congruent to side CD, that's called the reflexive property. The reflexive property says that anything is congruent to itself. So because these two triangles share a side, that means those sides are congruent to each other, and that is because of the reflexive property. So I can do the same idea over here. I have 3 pairs of angles and 3 pairs of sides just by looking at the names. I have to name the angles with the letter L very carefully because L is in both triangles. So I will name my angles MLK. So I'll go middle first last. So that means middle first last is BLC. And then I have M and B, and I have K and C. And again, LM, LB, MK, BC, LK, LC. It's just a matter of looking at the names of the triangles and picking the letters that are in the same position in each name. And of course, these types of angles, vertical angles, exist all of the time, and they're here. 1, 2, those angles are congruent because they're vertical angles. So pause right now. I want you to pause, and I want you to try these two. So let me show you the answers for both. In this first one, we had another instance of the reflexive property. We share the same side. So I say that side BC is congruent to side BC, and that's the reflexive property. It's congruent to itself. I had to be careful about naming these angles because vertex B and vertex C are in both triangles. So I need to use 3 letters to name all of those angles there. So CBD, I went middle first last, and so then middle first last is CBT, and that's CBD is right here, and CBT is up here. And then I did BCD, this guy, and BCT. And then angle D and angle T, those are the easy ones because they're all by themselves, so I can just use 1 letter. Same thing happened over here, that my vertical angles I had to be careful about. And another thing you can notice, if you haven't already, that the middle letter in both names is the same, and that's the letter of the vertex, E. And then my vertical angles FEG and JEK. Again, I went middle letter, first letter, last letter, middle letter, first letter, last letter. So of course those ones are a lot of work. Sometimes we can look at triangles and just write the triangle congruent statement. That's a little less work, I think. So I have all my sides and angles marked up in each of these pairs of triangles. Over here, remember I have the reflexive property that exists. I just want to keep bringing that up. EF is congruent to EF. And then of course I have my vertical angles over here. Nothing here other than they share vertex G, but these are not vertical. So I'll look and I'll see that in my triangles, F corresponds in both places. The angle F in each triangle is the same, so that's my first letter. Then E is the same, and then B and G. So I have triangle FEG and triangle FEB. Here, E is congruent in this left triangle to G in this right triangle. So I'll start with E and G. F and B are congruent, so then I'll go F and B. And then my last letters in this triangle G is congruent to C in the triangle on the right. Last but not least, D is in both triangles, so I'll start with D. E and R correspond, they have 2 arcs. F and S correspond, they have 2 arcs as well. Or I'm sorry, they have 3 arcs. So those are my triangle congruence statements. So again, I want you to pause and I want you to write the triangle congruence statements here. Okay, so let me show you the answers. Again, I just want to point out here, again, I have angle Y in both. Those are vertical, and I have the reflexive property showing up here. Side CD is the same in both. And then I just match up the angle pairs to name the triangle. So my one arc, U and D, 2 arcs, V and E, 3 arcs, W and W, and so on and so forth. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to copy both pictures for both of these pairs of triangles. Copy them exactly as you see them. In the first one, I want you to write the 6 congruent statements. And then in this one, I want you to write the triangle congruent statements. So use your notes as a reference. Go back and look at those problems we did. Go back and slide through the video. If you got stuck, do these 2 on a separate piece of paper. Copy the pictures. Put your name on top. Give it to me so that I can see what you know.